Hi guys, good evening. Let's get started for today's session. Let me share my screen. Can you all see my screen? Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for confirming. Yeah, let's get started. So the topic for today is we will be seeing introduction to MySQL. So first, what is a database, and then we'll be seeing what is a DBMS, and then we'll be starting with one kind of a database called MySQL. Okay, so that is the agenda for today, and let's get started. And yesterday we completed till the front end part, and from today, so it's going to be like backend. So we'll start with database for next 4 days. So 2 days MySQL and 2 days MongoDB, and from Monday we'll be seeing we'll go over with the Node.js. Okay, so that is the plan. So let's get started with database. Okay, so starting with database. So what is a database basically? So you might have heard this word from most of the places. What is the database basically is? It is a storage. It is a kind of a storage, and we are going to store some data inside it in certain form. Okay, so that is what basically a database is. So it is something like a storage that is going to store your database. It can be anything. It can store any data. It's not like user or whatever. Okay, so you can store any type of data inside your database. Okay, so basically a storage unit to store your data. Okay, so that is what database is. So why do we need database basically? So in the front end, what we display is we will display some content from our server, whatever that the server sent, and we'll be displaying those data. And it needs to be stored in the form of in the form of something like binary data inside your database, right? So that's the purpose of it. So we cannot store all the data in our files. For example, we cannot store all the users information in a file and retrieving them, so it's really costly, and that's where database comes into part. Okay, so what is the purpose of database? It is going to store some data, and we are going to retrieve that data, and you can just update the data or whatever. Okay, so basically we are going to manipulate some data inside our database. Okay, so that is the thing here. So then we have something called DBMS. Okay, so if you are a computer science student, so you will be learning this. You might have learned this already. So which is something called database management system. Okay, so this is what database management system is. Okay, so this is what DBMS is. So what is a DBMS basically is? So as the full forms here, so it is going to manage your database. Okay, so consider, so this is an hierarchy. Okay, so we basically learn these keywords. So you are a user, you might go to the database, and so you are a user. Consider you are an user. You are going to open a database and manipulate something inside it. Okay, so database. So there is a communication that is going to happen between you and the database. So you will be storing data, you will be retrieving data. If you want to get the data, you will request the database, and it returns some data. Okay, so that is what the communication between them. It can be user or our backend applications, right? Our backend application also communicate with your database and give us data, right? So it can be a user or any backend language or any application. Okay, so we can have it in this way. So basically this is how the hierarchy is. Okay, so as a user or any application like backend application will communicate with the database and get the data and send it to our client. So client is nothing but our React. Okay, so React is a client in our example. Okay, so the client can be anything, any application like Angular or whatever. Okay, so basic thing here is as a web how web works. So your web application work in this way. Okay, you have a client. Okay, as a client, you will be communicating with the server to get some data. And what your server does, it will communicate with your database, okay, and fetch data. And this is what happens. So as a client, so consider client is nothing but in your case, it's going to be React. Okay. And what is the server? Your server is something like Node.js. Okay. So Node. So what is the database? So we can use Mongo or MySQL, whatever. In our case, we'll be using MongoDB in our example. Okay. So MongoDB. Okay. So this is how the communication in your web development is. Client, you communicate with server, and your server application, which is Node application, and MongoDB will communicate with them and get the data. Okay. And this node here, right? That is what application here. Okay. So as application, you are going to communicate with your database and get some data. Okay. And in between, okay, so there is a communication happening between here, right? So that is something called DBMS. Okay. So database management system. Okay. So there is a system, that is a database management system in order to communicate between your application or your user and the database. Okay. And that is something called database management system. Okay. So this is what a short introduction of what is a database and DBMS. Okay. So there are different types of DBMS. Okay. So one is relational and one is non-relational. So you might have heard these words. So relational and non-relational. Okay. So before that, okay, so I'll explain that in short. So I told you, right? So your user or application and database. Okay. So it is going to communicate between and it is going to communicate using a system called database management system. Okay. And how do they communicate? So for example, okay, so as a mentor, okay, I'm here and I'm communicating to you students, okay, using a language called English. Okay. So we need we need a language to communicate between any person, all right? So that's what language here. Okay. Same way, your application and the database uses database management system. Okay. Here, okay, it uses a language called SQL. Okay. So that is what SQL is. So in the case of relational database, we use something called SQL. What is the SQL? So SQL is nothing but structured query language. Okay, so that is what SQL means. Okay, so structured query language. So see here, language. Okay, so what I am communicating here, I am communicating to you with the language called English, right? Same way, your application or user that communicates with your database using a language called SQL. Okay, in the case of relational database. Okay, so in the case of relational database, you will use SQL to communicate. Okay, and in the case of non-relational, we will see it in the next session. Okay, so next two sessions. So for now, I'm going to have the communication between the I'm going to explain only the relational. Okay, so what is a relational basically? So relational is nothing but, okay, so your data. So consider you have something like in your database. Okay, so what is the data basically? It can be a table, okay, or anything. Okay, so relational. So relational data is nothing but, okay, so basically you will have some data inside your database. Okay, so something like for example, in our case, we'll take user. Okay, so in our JSON placeholder, I'll take this example. So we have ID, name. Okay, suppose name. Your user table will have ID, name, username. Okay, so your user inside your relational database, you have a data called user. Okay, it holds ID, name, and username. And there is something called post. Okay, so if you go to posts, so we have again ID, okay, and then user ID, and then title, and something called body here. Okay, same way we will have one more data called comment. Okay, so what it has, so if I go to comments, so your comments has again ID, post ID, name, email, and those details. Okay, so basic details. Okay, So see here now, all these data are interrelated. How? Your post will be posted by a user. Okay, so something like user ID, right? So this user ID is from this particular user data. Okay, so that's how we saw in our example, right? In our React example. So our post contains two things. One is who posted this data and what are all the comments. Okay, so your post table will have user ID, and that particular user ID is related to your user table. Same way, here in your comments, okay, you have ID, post ID, and name. Okay, so here you have post ID here, right? So what does it mean? This is specific. This command is specific to each and every post. So if you go here, these are all the commands that are specific to post ID 1. Okay, so if you go to any other commands, post ID 2 will have these much of commands. Okay, so these data are related to one and each and one another here, right? So that's why it's something called relational database. Okay, so you have a relation between the tables, okay, or the data, and that's why it's something called relational database. Okay, and same way in the case of non-relational, you can understand this. Okay, so there is no relation at all inside your data. Okay, and that's why it's something called non-relational. Okay, so hierarchy here's your user or application communicates with your database, and there should be an intermediator, right? And that's something called database management system. Okay, so which acts as an intermediator between your database and your user or the application. And inside your, if you use relational database, there are two types of database management system. One is relational and one is non-relational. Okay, if you use relational database, okay, so you need to communicate between those things with any language, right? So in the case of relational database, we will use something called SQL to communicate to our database. Okay, so in the case of relational, we use SQL language to communicate with your database. Okay, so we sometimes call SQL. Okay, and sometimes it is called SQL. Okay, so there are two things, and SQL is nothing but structured English query language. Okay, actual thing is SQL. Okay, but as Indians, as we call SQL. Okay, but if you go to any other, if you consider like any other countries like US or any other countries, they call it as SQL. Okay, so they'll call it as structured English query. So your QUE here, right? So that is something called QUE here. Okay, so that's what. So SQL, SQL. So we call it as SQL, and in other countries like US and English speaking country, we'll call them as SQL. Okay, but the scenarios or the syntax and everything is same. Okay, between these, the language is between the language that act between here, right? So that acts same. Okay, but only the name differed here. Okay, SQL, SQL, both are same. So that is all about your normal introduction to your database and database management system. Okay, so here I told you, right, database management system and relational database. Okay, and relational database communicates, relational database management system communicates with your database using a language called SQL. Okay, so what are all some examples of your relational database? So that is where MySQL, SQL Server, okay, Oracle, and etc. Okay, so these are all the database that are communicating with the. So these are all database management system. Okay, relational database management system basically. Okay, examples of relational database management system, and that communicates with your database. Okay, using a language called SQL. Okay, or SQL. Okay, so this is a brief introduction of what is database and database management system. Okay, clear on this? Can everyone confirm? Clear on this? Alrighty. Okay. Thank you for confirming. How is MySQL different from SQL? Just now I told you, right? There is no. See here. MySQL is a database management system, DBMS. SQL is a language that the database management system and your database communicates. Okay. So that's what the difference. MySQL is a database management system. SQL is a language that your MySQL uses to communicate to the database. So basically SQL is common. Okay. So your MySQL, SQL Server, Oracle, okay, everything is built using SQL. Okay. So basically this management system uses SQL as a language to communicate to your database. Okay. So that is what the difference between MySQL and SQL. Okay. So now we are done. Okay. So let's start. The introduction is completed. Okay. So this is basic database management system and everything is complete. Okay. So this is what we are going to take an example of MySQL. Okay. In order to, from the relational database system. Okay. Same way for non-relational. So non-relational here. So obviously, there is no relationship between the data. Okay. There will be no data different communication between user or post or common. Okay. So it acts as a different data. It acts as a different data. Okay. And here, okay. So that's why we call it as no SQL. Okay. So there is no SQL. There is no language to communicate. Okay. So that is what your non-relational database is. Okay. So relational database uses a language called SQL here, right? Same way, non-relational doesn't use any SQL, no language at all. We call them as a no SQL database. Okay. And example of no SQL database here is MongoDB, Cassandra, and other things. Okay. So there are multiple no SQL database. Okay. And in our scenario, in our plan, okay. So for the next 2 days, I'll be using MySQL for the relational database too. In order to know what is a relational database, I'm going to use MySQL. Same way, I'm going to use MongoDB for the non-relational. Okay, so this is the plan. I will store it here. So let's do for this is going to be database. Yeah. So now, so yeah, enough with our theory. Okay, so let's move on to have them practical. Okay, so we need to install. Now we are going to install MySQL. Okay, so I will say I will give you the steps how to do that. Okay, so you can install in your local machine. So here, just go and type MySQL. So there is something called mysql.com. Okay, so go to the MySQL section here. Okay, so inside your mysql.com, go to the downloads. So this is enterprise cluster, and here at the bottom, okay, there is something called MySQL community. Okay, MySQL community downloads. If you click on that, okay, so here's the download section. Okay, so here you can see multiple things that are running here. Okay, so there are two things basically. One is your MySQL, and one is your MySQL GUI. Okay, so what your MySQL does here is, okay, so what is MySQL is, again, I told you, right, it's a database. Okay, database management system. Okay, so for a MySQL, you need to use something called here. We have some multiple things. So MySQL community server. Okay, so if you click on this, so if you're going to with Windows, okay, you need to use this. Okay, if you go with any other OS, you can go here, something called MySQL community server. Okay, if you click on that, so here, okay, so this is the MySQL server here. So you can select the OS that you want. Okay, so this is the basic page actually. Here you can go and select your database. I mean your OS. Okay, so if you want to have your Windows, you can go select here Ubuntu and other things. Okay, so I'm using Mac. Okay, so you can go ahead here and install your things. Okay, so basically whatever that you based on your current system. Okay, if it is a 64-bit or if it is like any other OS that you have. Okay, so you can basically go here and download it. Okay, so what happens here is, okay, here in the case of Mac, or in the case of your Ubuntu, or in the case of any other except Windows, okay, you need to install MySQL separately and MySQL GUI separately. So what is a MySQL GUI is? So your data is stored in a form of a binary in your system, right? So basically it will be stored in the case of binary, right? So tables, okay? So basically they are tables. In order to visualize them, okay, so we need a tool called MySQL graphical user interface, okay, so which is GUI, okay. So a sample of GUI is something called workbench, okay. So there is something called MySQL workbench. So we need to install this particular GUI, okay, in order to view our data, view our tables, or whatever that we have in our MySQL. We need to view that here, okay, in our MySQL workbench. So this is MySQL workbench, okay. So this is the logo. So since it is already installed in my system, this is what it looks like, okay. So in the case of Windows, in the case of your Windows, or okay, so in the case of Windows, okay, what happens here is both your workbench and your MySQL server, okay, will be installed by default, okay. It will come. So if you go here, MySQL installer for Windows, okay, and if you install this, okay, so here it is, okay. If you install this, what will happen here is both your MySQL and both on MySQL workbench will be installed, okay. But if you go to the MySQL in the case of other OSs like Mac or Ubuntu, okay, you need to install my community server separately, which is means MySQL. You need to install workbench separately, okay. So that's the thing. So that's you need to have it in your mind, okay. So whenever, so this is what the hierarchy is, okay. So you need to, you just go to this website, okay. In the case of Windows, you can go ahead directly here and download your thing, okay. In the case of other OS, go to community server separately, go to workbench separately, install them separately, okay. So that is the thing here. So the installation processes, okay. So the installation processes, everything is as you install a normal software, right? So there will be an exe, okay. So in the case of Windows, okay, just give next, okay. So it will ask you for a folder where you want to install. So automatically there will be a folder, it will select everything. You just need to give next, okay. And you have to consider one thing is, so before you give the installation is finished, at the end, okay, it will ask you for a password, okay, which is something called root password, okay. So whenever you use MySQL, MySQL, you just need to give next, okay. So basic steps whenever you install a particular application, okay. So if you go to MySQL, okay, so at the end it will ask you for a password, okay, which is something called root password. So what it means is, so it is the login, okay. So basically it is a login for your MySQL, okay. So you need to set up your initial password. It will ask for you, okay. So if you don't give that, it will not allow you to install, okay. So basically whenever you install MySQL, at the end it will ask you for a password, okay. So please remember that password that you give, okay. So you will need to have them whenever you log into a MySQL database, okay. So that is the thing. So please have this in mind, okay. So it will ask for your password. You enter that particular password, whatever that you want, okay. And whenever you want to log into a MySQL management system or MySQL DBMS, okay, so you need that password to log in, okay. So that is the only thing. And for MySQL workbench, you just give next, okay. So nothing different, okay. So the installation process very simple, no complications at all, okay. So that is all about your MySQL, okay. And here, so once you are done, okay, so once you install your MySQL, you can go ahead to your MySQL workbench, okay. So when you click on MySQL workbench, so this is how it looks, and these are all this is my own, okay. So there will not be it will be empty. It will not look like this, okay. It will be an empty that will be showing here. You just go to here, okay. So plus, okay. If we go here, it will ask for your connection, okay. So name is, you can give any name, okay. So this is basically what happens here is, so when we run our application like React application, what was the port? So we'll go to localhost 3000, right? So basically your 3000 port will work for your React, okay. So your React application, okay. And same way, the default port for your MySQL is, so default port. So MySQL default port is 3307, okay. So how our React application runs in localhost 3000, right? Same way your MySQL will work on the port 3307, okay. So you go here and here, okay. So sorry, 3306, okay. So here you can give localhost. I told you, right? Localhost colon 3306, something like this. So if you run your application, what will happen? You will go to localhost 3000, right? So in order to implement your React application, same way your MySQL runs on 3306. Okay, so host name is localhost 3306 and username is by default root. Okay, and password is, I told you, right? Whenever you install a particular particular MySQL installer, okay, it will allow you to enter a password, right? So you need to remember that particular password and have them entered here. Okay, so it will connect to your local host. So if you enter a wrong password, okay, it will throw you an error. Okay, so please remember that particular password. Okay, you can give any connection name. This is something like local host or whatever that thing you want. Okay, so basic thing here, and go over here and you can give your host name. Host name is localhost. Okay, so because this is in our local, right, we can have local host here, and the default port is 3306. Okay, so every details will be automatically here. Okay, and the username is root. Okay, so whenever you install your MySQL, it will ask for your password to install. Use that particular password. Okay, whenever you log into the system. Okay, once you enter this, okay, so once you give okay, it will be connected. Okay, and just give okay, that's it. Okay, so then what you need to go here is, it will be available here. Okay, so here if I edit this, okay, see, this is how it looks. Okay, I just gave this connection name. Host name is localhost 3306, and I have some password stored here. Okay, so that is what. So when you do this, okay, it will be added here. Okay, and you can just click here. Okay, once you click this, this is what your MySQL workbench looks. Okay, so you can see in the side. Okay, so before moving on to the MySQL workbench, clear on this, clear on the installation part. Okay, thanks for confirming. So now let's move on to our GUI tool. Okay, so here we have something called MySQL workbench. Okay, so this is how your UI looks. So in the first time, okay, so in the first time, how it will look like this. So this is how it will look at the first time. Okay, so in this particular here we have here, right? So there is something called two tabs: administration, schemas. There are two types here. There are two tabs here: administration and schemas. So schemas is nothing but our databases. Okay, so whatever that you create, okay, so whatever the database that you create, for example, in our example, what we have something called post, right? Post application. So you can create a database here, something called Gui post. Okay, and inside your database you can have all your tables like we have here, right? So here I told you, right, user, post, comments. Okay, you can have those tables inside that particular database. Okay, so basic understanding here is, see, this is the tool. Okay, and you can go here, there is administration, so you may not need this. Basically here schemas here. Okay, and you can write your queries. Okay, so I told you, right, your database and your database management system communicates between with using a language called SQL, right? Okay, so you need to write those languages here. Okay, so we'll write our queries here. Okay, and in return it will give us an output. Okay, so that is what basically SQL is. Okay, so this is the place we will write our queries. Okay, so then yeah, that is all about your database. Okay, and some options are here. Okay, so if you want to create a database using your tool, okay, you can use it here, new schema. Okay, and create your own schema, or you can write your own queries to create a schema. Okay, so that is the thing. So we will see it in short. Okay, so let's move here. So introduction to database is done. DBMS, MySQL introduction, and installation of MySQL and MySQL workbench. Okay, so let's move on to data types. So you guys learned JavaScript. Okay, so what is a data type basically? Okay, so basically it's a type of data. Okay, so you're going to define some type to your data that is stored in your database. Okay, so that is what data type is. The same applies in your MySQL as well. Okay, so MySQL has some data types in it. Okay, for example, if you I'm going to take this example here. So here, this is your user database. Okay, and we have data called ID. I will remove this. And I have a data called name here. Okay, and I have what else I have? Something called, okay, I'll have city. Okay, so ID. So in the case of JavaScript, what will be the data type? We will be having number, right? Okay, same way here we have something called integer. Okay, int, we can mention int or it can be integer. Okay, so we basically store IDs like okay, what I'll do is data types. So there is something called int, okay, or integer. You can mention in two ways. Okay, it is going to store your numbers. Okay, 0, 1, 2, 3, and whatever. Okay, and there are another data type called float. Okay, and double. Okay, so there are two things. So what basically these are same. Okay, so it's just a short form of int. Okay, you can mention int or you can mention integer. Okay, there is something called float. Okay, float is nothing but you are going to store your decimal values. Okay, so 0 0.23, 0 0.456, something like this, and 0 point something like this. You can store 7.893, whatever here. Okay, double is nothing but it's an advanced version of your float. Okay, you can store maximum data. For example, in your float you can store only as much as like this. Okay, so something like 32 bit. Okay, same way here you can inside your double. Okay, you can store big numbers. Okay, so 93 something like this. Okay, so that is the difference between your float and double. Okay, so these are all some MySQL data types: int or integer, float, double. Okay, so these are some usual things that we use. I'm going to show you only the usual things or commonly used things only. Okay, so there is something called varchar. Okay, so what it means is it is going to show you store a string. Okay, so basically whatever the string that you want to have. Okay, so for example, you can have Gui, you can have test, or these are all some example. You can mention anything. Okay, and for each and every property that you mentioned here, right? Okay, so there it takes a function inside it. Okay, what it means is you can call integer in this way. Okay, and you can send something to. Okay, or you can take integer and it can take something like any integer, something like this, or 2. Okay, what it means is it will take only 3-digit numbers. Okay, so it can take up to 999. Okay, so basically it can take up to 999. Okay, basically it can store only 3 digits. Okay, same way this example it can store only up to 99. Okay, so that is the thing. The same applies to your float as well. Okay, so float. So if you give float of 3, okay, what happens here is, so here the first that is before the dot here, right? It can store up to 999. Okay, so you cannot you can have any numbers here, and you cannot store like this. Okay, so this in this way. So basically this 3 mentions this. Okay, same way if you want to mention property to this also, you can mention something like this: float 3 comma 2. Then it means we can store up to three characters, and here you can store up to 2 characters. Okay, so that is the thing with the difference between having float of 3 and float of 3 comma 2. Okay, and same applies to your double as well. Okay, you can store the same as in your double. Okay, same way in the case of varchar. Okay, you can store something like this. If you mention like 5, okay, only 5 character length data can be stored. Okay, so Gui, so 4 characters Guis. Okay, and you can store up to this only. You cannot store. Even if you try to store them, it will truncate it. Okay, suppose if I have like Gui app, something like this. Okay, so it has 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 characters. If you try to store it them, okay, it will truncate it and store only go up to Gui A. Okay, so that's all about your varchar. Okay, so then we have something called boolean, bool or boolean. So as you know, it can store true or false. Okay, it can store true or false or 1 comma 0. Okay, so 1 0 or something like true and false, right? We can store these values. Okay, so that is the basic thing. So these are some common data types that we use. And what else? There is a special type here, something called enum. Okay, So enum is a data type. Okay, you can mention some set of values. Okay, so inside your enum, you can mention some set of values. For example, in the case gender, okay, so you can mention something like this enum. It can be male, it can be female, and it can be other. Okay, so something like this. So in the enum, you can mention some values. Okay, and only these values should be stored in this particular field. Okay, if you try to update any of the data, it will throw you an error in MySQL. Okay, so basically, if you can mention some fields like something like this, male, female, and other. Okay, so these are some basic things. So what else? So we basically use this, and yeah, so there are other types as well. So we have something called date. Okay, so we use date. Okay, so I'm just covering only the major things that we use. Okay, so there is something called date. Okay, you can store your data. Okay, store your date, something like this. Okay, 2020 or whatever. Okay, same way there is something called date time. Okay, you can store them both with the time as well. Okay, 03, 04, 2020, and you can store something like that. 4 o'clock 56 minutes and 46 seconds. Okay, you can store it in this way also, date time. Okay, so these are all these are all some data types that we basically follow. Okay, so some common data types. Okay, clear on the data types part? Okay, so this is all about your data types. So is SQL also case sensitive? No, SQL is not a case sensitive. Enum. Okay, so here, so if you mention a column or if you mention a data as a enum, okay, and you can have some values inside it. Okay, male, female, and other. If you mention this, what happens here is this particular field will have only values from these things. Okay, it can be male, it can be female, it can be other. Okay, you cannot store any other values in that particular column. Okay, so that is what enum is. So installation asks for .NET framework to be installed to continue. Why it is needed? What .NET framework does? Maybe like MySQL is from your Windows, right? So MySQL is invented by your Windows. Okay. So they they may ask you to install some frameworks because they have some dependency. Okay. So if it asks, okay, you can have them installed. Okay. Yeah. So here, okay, just give me a minute. I'm getting a call again and again. Just give me a minute. Yeah, sorry guys. Okay, so we are done with our data types. Okay, so I'll just zoom out. So what else we completed? Database, database, learning system. Okay, so now we are ready with our some basics. Okay, so now we are going into in depth with our language. Okay, so what is the language that you are going to communicate? That is something called SQL. Okay, so SQL. So we are going to communicate to the database. Okay, using our language called SQL. Okay, there are three types of languages basically. Okay, inside your SQL. One is DDL. one is DML, and one is DQL. Okay, so what it means is data definition language. So these are all some types of your SQL. Okay, inside your SQL, we usually use this. Same way, data manipulation language. Same way, data query language. Okay, so there are three types. One is DDL, DML, and DQL. Okay, data definition language, data manipulation language, data query language. Okay, so as you I can assume from the syntax. Okay, assume from the full form. Okay, so it is going to define some language here. Okay, and that this DDL is going to focus on defining your data. Okay, so defining your data, and that's why data definition language. Okay, same way here, as you assume, here we are going to manipulate our data, like inserting our data, updating our data, and deleting our data, and those things we'll be doing here. Okay, and the last thing is data query language, which is we are going to query our data. So query is nothing but we are going to fetch our data. Okay, so query is nothing but fetching our data, right? So something like reading. So in your CRUD operation, okay, so basically in your CRUD operation, we will do create, update, delete. Okay, your R part, right, which is reading part, is done here. Okay, because we are going to fetch our data, right? Data query language. We are going to query our data using DQL, which is something called data query language. Okay, so let's get started. So first thing is data definition language. Okay, so what is the definition? So for example, if you take your user table here, okay, so if you take data, first you need to create a database. Okay, for example, here, so you need to create a database for you, right? So in order to store your data. Okay, so those are something called your definition. Okay, so the data, you need to give your database name in order to create a database. Okay, so what is the language, or what is the syntax to create a database? Okay, so that is the question here. Okay, so in your DDL here, okay, the first thing is we're going to create a database. How to create a database? The syntax for creating a database is, see, create database. Okay, and your database name here. So database name, whatever the database name that you want to mention. Okay, create database name. Okay, so database can be called as schema. Okay, you can call them as schema as well. Okay, but this is the syntax of your how to create a database. Okay, so create database and database name. Okay, so we'll try it. So here I'm going to try this create. So I will zoom in. So is there any zoom option here? There should be a zoom option. Okay, can you see my screen, or it is very narrow? Okay. Yeah, I used it. It's not working. Oh, here it is. Okay, so we are going to create our database. Okay, so create database and your database name. So I'm going to have Gui post. Okay, so something like this. You know, always your statements should end with your semicolon. Okay, so this is semicolon here. So always your SQL statements should end with semicolon here. Okay, so create database and your database name. Okay, so I'm going to create a database called Gui post. Okay, so you can run them here. So once you're done here, okay, so you can find your logs as well here. So responses, one row is affected and it is created successful. Okay, so if you get a check mark here, it is successful. So it should be listed here, right? So you can go over here and refresh. See, now your database is created now. Okay, so this is how we need to create a database. Okay, so create database and whatever the database name that you want. Okay, so this is an example of creating the database. Okay, so now we have created our database. Okay, so created our database and done. Suppose if you want to delete your database, something like dropping your database. Okay, so So deleting the database. So how to delete the databases? We have a command called drop. Okay, so drop database and that particular database name. Okay, so the commands will be very simple. Okay, so it's like human readable only, and that's why it's something called SQL. Okay, structured English query language. Okay, it is just in the basic English language only. Okay, so if you want to delete, if you want to create a database, just go create database and database name. If you want to delete a database, drop database and database name. Okay, simple as that. So go here, and I can give an example. Drop database and your Gui post. Okay, so I'll try this. We'll go here and run this. Okay, so your database drop and removed from here as well. Okay, so that is the basics of your data definition language with your database. Okay, so I'm going to create the database again. So now if I go here, refresh. Okay, so it will happen here. So now we are done with creating a database, deleting your database. Now if you want to change your name, okay, so suppose you have Gui post here, right? Suppose if you want to change your name, okay, so something like renaming your database. So we have alter. Okay, so this is the hierarchy. Okay, so this is what your MySQL uses: create, drop, alter. Okay, so these are all three things. Okay, so create, we have one more thing called delete. Okay, so create, alter, these are all things we basically use in our definition language. Okay, so alter. Okay, so if you want to alter your database name, something like renaming your database name, alter database. Okay, you need to mention your old name here. Okay, so old, so which is your Gui post, right? So old database name. Okay, and here see modify, there will be a thing here, modify name equal to, so your new name. Okay, so this is the command that you want to have: new database, new database name. Okay, see here. Alter, so alter is nothing but you are going to modify some database things here. Alter database. Okay, your old database name, modify your name. Okay, so altering your database, which is the database Gui post, right? You're altering the database and modifying the name equal to your new database name here. Okay, so see, example is alter database and your old name, which is Gui post here, right? Gui post, and modify name equal to, you can mention anything here. You can mention Gui. Okay, something like this. So we'll run this. We'll go here and run this here. So I'll have to modify name equal to modify name equal to. Okay, so alter database Gui post and modify name equal to Gui. Okay, so this is how we basically use. Okay, why is it throwing me an error? Alter database Gui post modify name, correct one, right? No, it should be modified. Okay, so it's throwing me an error, but okay. So, but the thing is, this is the syntax. Okay, so this is the syntax to change your name in your MySQL. Okay, alter database Gui post and modify your name to Gui. Okay, so this is how we will be renaming the database. Okay, but it's throwing me an error. I will see it in short. Okay, so this is the thing here. Okay, so what is a DDL? So DDL is a definition language. Okay, it is going to allow you to create, allow you to define your data. Okay, so what is you're going to defining here? we're going to define a database and manipulating that particular database and renaming those database. Okay, so these are all the things. So database part is done. Okay, so and here in addition to your DDL, okay, we have another things as well. So if you go to your GUI post, okay, so if you go here, there is something called tables. Okay, so can ignore these things. Okay, for now we are going to concentrate only on tables. Okay, so tables are nothing but, so I told you, right? So tables are nothing but we are, for example, if you go to the user table, okay, it will have ID, name, and username. Same way your post will have ID, user ID, and other things. Same way comments will have some other things here. Okay, so these are all the tables. Okay, so database is one unit. Inside that particular database, you will have multiple data, something like user information, post, comments, and other things. Okay, and that is what table is. Okay, so we are going to create a table. So creating table. So this is the syntax: create table. Okay, you have to mention the table name, and here, see here, you need to give something like this, something like function symbol here. Okay, and you can mention the column names. Okay, for example, I can have, for now I will have column 1 and column 2. Okay, so here what its column means is, if you take your user details, it is something called ID, name, and other things, right? So that is what column names are. Okay, and column names. Okay, and here you have mentioned column names, right? What is this particular column data type is? Okay, so for example, column 1, for example, ID. Okay, I will have it as something called integer. Okay, I can have it here. Same way, column 2 is going to be something like varchar. Okay, so I'll have string. Okay, so it is going to store some data. So this is how, okay, we basically create our database. Create table and your table name. Okay, inside your function, okay, you can mention your column name and your data type. Column name, that particular data type. Okay, so consider we are going to create a table in our user. Okay, so see here, or your post, I will take post. Okay, so create table post. Okay, so here, what is the columns we have? So if I go to post here, so what are all the data that is it is holding? User ID, and title, right? Okay, so ID is going to be int. Okay, I'm going to have it as a int. And then what else? We have something called user ID. Okay, so user ID. Okay, and I'm going to have it as again int. Okay, so it is going to be int here, right? So that's why. So then we have something called title. So title, it's going to be varchar. Okay, and what else? Body. Okay, so body, we can mention varchar. Okay, and at the end, semicolon. Okay, so creating a table, something called post. Okay, and okay, varchar of 40. So do you want me to have 40? Okay, so here we can mention some length. Okay, so for example, I can have like 40 as you told, and I can have some varchar here. I can have something called 100. Okay, so it is going to store some 100 data. Okay, so varchar of things here and varchar of things here. Okay, post. So create table post ID. It is going to be integer. User ID going to be integer. Title varchar. It is going to store a string that has 40 characters. Body varchar. Okay, and again it's going to be 100 length. Okay, so that is the thing here. Okay, it's not memory size. Okay, so it is not memory size usually. It's something like the length. Okay, the string, the length here, right? So that is the length here. So here, so what if you don't mention 40? Okay, okay, you can create MySQL without your length. Okay, but what happens here is this particular window is handled by your MySQL. Okay, your MySQL DBMS. But in the case of normal SQL, you can use it. If you use something like this in your MySQL here, okay, it is throwing me an error. Okay, so something like, what will be an error? See, it is allowing me, it is showing me to enter some details. Okay, so for sure you need to have some length here. In the case of your MySQL, this particular GUI. Okay, but you can create varchar. For example, I can create table here itself, like create table, okay, and you can have your columns here, id, okay, the same way here, id integer. Same way, I'm going to have name here, and here instead of varchar, I can directly mention varchar, okay. Okay, it is okay. So what happens here is, even if you mention varchar, see, it will take a 45 length, okay. So that's how your mysql behave, okay. You can mention as much as characters here, okay, but if you don't mention, okay, so it will take 45, okay. But when you type your query here, okay, it will throw you an error. But when you create a table, okay, it will directly take it. For example, if I go here and take varchar, okay, so here I know I don't need to give here anything here, so varchar, okay, something like this. What is happening here? Name varchar, okay. It will take the length of 45 by default, okay. So that's how your mysql works. But in the case of you writing a query, okay, you need to mention it. So you need to mention it explicitly. So 45, okay. So same way, inside your integer, you can directly create, like, it can be like 2 characters or 2 length, okay. You can mention it this way, or you don't want to mention it this way. So they have a validation for varchar as well. So what is the reason? Because varchar is going to store n number of data, right? So it's a string, right? That's why they are allowing us to, or restricting us to, have a length mentioned for sure, okay. So length is must in varchar, okay. So that's what they are mentioning here, okay. So basic thing here is, in order to create a table, create table, the table name, the column name, and the data type, okay. So here there should be a length must, okay. So 45, I have default is 45, okay. So if I run this, okay, so your table is created. If you go here and refresh, okay, so inside your table there will be post, okay. So you can see your post here. If you want to see the information, just click here. It will have columns, id, user id, and other things, okay. If you want to see the data inside your post, okay, so see here in your mysql documents, there are 2 options, okay, 3 options basically. If you over here, see I icon, which is information. Here it is a settings icon. If you want to modify your table, here it is going to select your table. So if you click on this, so inside your table, there is no data, okay. So this icon is to select your data. Same way, if you click on this, it is going to, if you want to change some name and other things, you can use this particular setting, okay. So altering the changes. Same way, if you click on I icon here, it will give you the information about your table, okay. Info about table, what is the column, index, and other things, okay. So these are 3 icons. Information about your table. If you want to modify some settings, you can have it here. If you want to query this, you can have this particular thing here, okay. So that is the thing. So what basically here is, you can do everything like DQL, DML, and your DDL, everything here in your tool itself, okay. So if you go here, you can create table and just add the columns and data types here, okay, something like this. But you should know queries, okay. You should know the language. You should never use GUI to do that, okay. So always have a basics on your languages, okay. So that's why I'm trying to create a table here, okay. So creating table with this configuration. ID is a column, user ID, and I just told you here, right? So it has a column now, ID, user ID, title, and body, okay. So this is how we need to create a table, okay. So now I'm going to copy the same example here. Okay. So now we are done with our creating the table, okay. Suppose same way, if you want to drop a table or delete a table, okay. So deleting, so you are going to answer me. So deleting table, okay. So see the database part here and tell me the what will be the table, what will be the for the table. Exactly. So same, go here, drop table and your table name, something like this, okay. So drop table and table name. So I can go here and write the same. And the table is, what is the table that we have? Post here, right? So drop table post. Okay, it's removed. Okay, so that is the thing. So drop table post will delete your table now. Okay, so I'll create the table again. You have it as an example. Okay, so now we are done with deleting a table. Okay, so basically we are just dropped completely. Okay, our definitions dropped and everything. Okay, so you need to create your table from scratch. So I'll create the table again. So because it's needed now. Okay, so now if you refresh, the table will be created. Okay, so now let's move on to modifying our table. Okay, so we are going to rename here. We just used renaming the database here, right? Okay, same way here we will do the same things here. So like removing a column, adding a new column, modifying the existing column, and those things we will do here. Okay, so basically we are going to alter our table. Okay, so the first thing is you have already a table here. Okay, so id, user id, and title and body and other things. Okay, suppose if you want to, okay, add a new column. Okay, so id, user id, and title, body. Okay, I need to have one more column. Okay, so adding new column. Okay, so what will be the query? So I told you, right, whenever we use whenever if you want to modify your definition, you need to use alter. Okay, so here I told you, right, same way, alter. Okay, so if you want to add a new column, this is the way, alter. Okay, table, what is the table that you want? Okay, and the table name. And here you need to add a column, right? So use add. Okay, column, and basically your column name. Okay, so what is the column name here? And the data type for that particular column. Okay, very simple. Alter the table, which is the table that you want. We have something called post table, right? We are going to alter that table. So alter table, that particular table name. Okay, so if you want to add a new column, add column, that particular column, and the data type. Okay, so example is simple. Okay, something like alter table. So what is the table that we have? We have something called post, right? So posts, I'm going to add a new column. Okay, and the column name is for example, what I can add. Okay, I will have something a test. Okay, so one more column here. Okay, and it's going to be, okay, I will have something called active. Okay, something like this. So some name, column name. Okay, and data type, it's going to be, I'm going to use it as a boolean. Okay, so I can use it in this way. So this is an example. If you want to add a new column, so I'm going here and run this. Okay, so now if I go here and run this, okay, see, a new column is added. Okay, suppose if you want to see the document definition for it, go to the information here and see the columns. Okay, so your active column is added. Okay, so which is something called a boolean. So by default, boolean will take as a tiny int. Okay, but the thing is, it is boolean. Okay, so that is the thing. So go here, alter table and column active name. Okay, so now you are going to so what do we see here? So delete name. Okay, so now you need to modify your existing column. Okay, suppose you have active column here, right? Okay, so you need to modify the definition for it, or you need to modify the data type for it. Okay, so how can I do it? Okay, so go here. So what will go is modify the existing column. Okay, so what is the query? Alter, again table, again it's going to be your table name. Okay, modify. Okay, so we saw here, right? Modify. Okay, same way, alter table name, modify here. Okay, so if you want to change the column name here, or the data type here, you can mention. So what is the what is the column name you are going to modify? So here, active. Okay, so the column name, and we can, for example, if you want to change the data type, you can mention new data type here. Okay, so new data type. So the example is something like this. Okay. So you already have a column called active. It's Boolean. Okay. So alter table post. I'm going to modify my active column. Okay. So it was Boolean, right? Now I'm trying to do it as what I can have something called varchar again. Okay. So varchar of something like 2. Okay. Or 3 or 4, whatever. Okay. So I will have it as 5. Okay. Something like this. Okay. So initially it was Boolean. Okay. So now I'm going to modify this to varchar of 5. Okay. So if you run this, okay, and go to the definitions here, info, columns. Now see, for active is varchar of 5. Okay. So this is how we will be modifying our existing column. Okay. And then if you want to delete a column, okay. So delete column. Okay. So now you are going to answer the same. Alter table and the particular table name. Okay. Table name. And here, as you know, drop column. Okay. And that particular column name that you want to delete. Okay. So alter table posts drop, which is the column that you want to delete. Okay. So drop column. I will delete the active column. Okay. So I have column here, right? Active. Okay. So if I go here and run this query, okay, and if I go to the definition again, see the columns, your active will not be available because you have deleted that particular column. Okay. So adding a new column, add a column. Modifying existing column, modify that particular column and data type. Deleting a column, drop column, that particular, whatever the column that you want to delete. Okay. So this is all about your DDL. Okay. So these are all comes under your DDL. So why it is DDL? So see here, everything is a definition. Okay. You're just modifying the database name, creating a database, dropping the database, renaming the database, creating a database with some configuration definition, deleting the database, and altering the database. So basically, the actions that are performed against your database and your table, something like on your configuration level, something like deleting a column, altering a column, other things. So these are all something like a definition, right? So that's why it's something called data definition language. Okay, clear on this? Clear on this part? Can everyone confirm? So clear on this part? So okay. So now so your DDL is done. Okay, so data definition language is done. So now let's move on to DML. Okay, it is something called data manipulation language. Okay, so what is a manipulation? I told you, right? So there is a data already in your database. Okay, and you have to manipulate those data. Something like if you want to create a new data, update existing data, or delete the data, those things comes under your data manipulation language. Okay, so basically they are also a query, something like this. We had a query here, right? So here we just had some queries, right? Same way, those are all the queries that are comes under DML. Okay, so let's see. So the first thing is, as you know, I'm going to explain you create, update, and delete. Okay. The first thing is we're going to create. Okay. So inserting a data, inserting data. Okay. So you already have a column table called post. Okay. So you already have a column called post. So now it has no data inside it. Okay. So suppose if you want to insert some data, okay, there is something called, see here, this is the syntax. Insert into your table name. So which is the table name that you want to insert, okay? And that particular function. I told you, right, whenever we create it, So here, whenever we created, I told you the column name, right? The column names you can mention in any order. Okay. So for example, if I want to insert something like ID, okay, ID, user ID, and then title, body. Okay. So these things. And so you just mentioned your insert into table name. Okay. Oh, sorry. Here it is syntax, right? So insert into table name, column 1, column 2, column 3, and column 4, whatever the column that you want to insert your data. And values, okay, and again a function, okay. So values that are corresponding. If we mention column 1 here, you need to mention the value for it. Same way, column 2, you need to mention it the second paragraph, okay. So column name here, okay. So for example, for the column 1, we'll have the value 1. Okay. Same way for column 2, we'll have value 2. Same way for value 3, and same way for value 4. Okay. So if you want to insert your data inside your table, okay, insert into, okay, table name, column 1, column 2, column, whatever the columns that you want to insert. Okay. So suppose if I want to insert it to my ID, user ID, title. So ID, user ID, title, body, and the value for it here. Okay. So values here. Okay. So let's see the example. So insert into, what is the table name? We have post, right? Posts. Okay. So what is the column name? I'm going to insert ID, user ID, title, and body. Okay. So what is the values that I'm going to give here? So what I'll do is values, and so I'm going to get some test data here. Okay. So ID equal to 1, user ID equal to 1. Okay. So then title, right? So I can get some data here. So quotes. So whenever you mention a string, you need to mention it in the quotes. I will have some sample data here. Okay. And the next thing is body. Okay. So you can mention some body data here, something like this. Okay. So this is how you need to insert your data inside your table. Okay. I'm going here. Okay. So here. So if I run this, okay, it's inserted one row affected. If I go to click on the rows, okay, see, now it has ID, user ID, title, and body. Okay. So you can update, you can even insert any data like to the next data. Okay. So I'm going to here, user ID is again, now the ID is 2, user ID is 1, and your data is this, title, and body is something like this. Inserted. Okay. So inserted, if you go to the database, there will be 2 records. Okay. So this is how we'll be inserting table into our database. Okay. So now our insertion part is done. Okay. So basically, so now you are going to, if you want to update your database, okay. So update data. Okay. So here. So what is an updating? What is about updating the data? Okay. So that's the question. So the same, we have something called update command. Okay. So update. So for example, what is the table name? Okay. Update table name. Okay. See, set. Okay. So what is the value that you want to set? For example, for column 1. Okay. So what I'll do is I'm going to column. Okay, I'll do as column 1. Okay. So I have column user ID 2. Okay. So what I'll do is I'm use column 2. Okay. And the new value. Okay. So new value for your column 2. Okay. Okay. So basically, if you want to do this, you can do it in this way. Okay. So see here, update table name set column 2 equal to your new value. Okay. So example is update posts. Okay. Set. Okay. I'm going to update user ID. It's 1 now, right? I'm going to update it to 3. Okay. So you can use it in this way. So go here and run this. Okay. And sorry, I need to set up a setting. Please don't mind this. So I have some restrictions in my system. Okay. So now we go here, update, post, set, user ID equal to 3. I run this. Okay. if I go here, see, your user ID is now updated to 3. Okay. So initially it was 1. Now all the user ID, now the user ID is updated to 3 here. Okay. Set user ID equal to 3. Okay. So this is how we will be updating our data. Okay. So now, so now, as you assume, now it's going to be delete data. Okay. So delete data here. Okay. So delete, okay, from whatever the table name. Okay, so table name. Okay, that's it. Delete from table name. Okay, so what is our example? So delete from post. Okay, so if I go here and run this command, okay, and run my post here, there will be no data inside my table. Okay, so every data will be deleted now. Okay. Okay, so that's all about your create, update, and delete. Okay. So do you guys have any questions on this? So create, inserting data is nothing but your create operation in your CRUD operation. Okay. Update data is up to update data, and delete is to delete the data from the table. Okay. So insert into table name and whatever the column that you want to insert, and you need to mention values and corresponding values to that particular column. Okay. Same in order to update a particular update of data, update the table name, set user ID equal to 3. What it means is it will update your post with set with user ID 3. Okay. Then if you want to delete the data, so delete from post. Okay. So it will delete all the data inside your database. Okay. Basically from the table. Okay. How to update data? I was expecting that, but we will see tomorrow. Okay. So we'll have a session for class. Okay. So there is something called class in your MySQL. Okay. We have a topic yesterday. So that is the agenda for tomorrow. I will show them. Okay. So for now, you need to understand here is you want to insert them, you need to use insert data. If you want to update them, you need to use something called update table name, set, and that particular column name. Okay. Same if you want to insert the data, you need to use delete. I mean delete the data, you need to use delete from the post. Okay. So that is the thing. So clear on this. So clear on the DML. DML part is done. Can everyone confirm? So your DML part is done. Okay. So now, so the last thing is DQL. Okay. So we'll go with DQL. Okay. So DQL is data query language. Okay. So I told you, right, it is going to perform your read operation. Okay. So for that, I will insert some sample data. Okay. So I'll insert the data here. So I'll insert some sample data to okay. So if I go to my post, so it has 3 data. It's ID equal to another things. Okay. So let's see. So what is reading the data? Okay, so reading the data is nothing but querying your data. Okay, so how to query your data basically. Okay, so here DQL is nothing but there is only one section, which is something called reading the data. Okay, so no other new queries. Okay, so if you want to read a data, read a database, or read a table, okay, you need to use something called select. Okay, so select star from whatever the table name that you want to mention. Okay, table name. Okay, so that's it. Okay, so reading all the data from the table. Okay, select star from table name. Okay, so go here and mention post. Okay, and run this. See, all the data will be showing here. Okay, select start from post. Okay, so that is the example for your select statement. Okay, so select start from post. Okay, so now if you want to read a specific column, For example, I need only ID and user ID to be selected or queried. Okay, so you can go here and ID, and if you want to mention like if you want to take a title alone, okay, so ID comma title, okay, only that particular data will be listed. Okay, so if you mention star, it will apply to all the data. Okay, if you want to read reading data with specific column. Okay, if you do this, okay, you have to mention select column, whatever the column that you want, column 1 or column 4. You can change the order as well. Okay, so from that particular table name. Okay, so example is this is the example. If you want to mention, if you want to get ID and title alone from the post, okay, you can mention it in this way. Okay, so this is how you need to query your data. Okay, clear on this? So your DQL is done. Can everyone confirm? Clear on this? Okay, okay. Thank you. Okay, so now, so your basic commands are done. Okay, so here, okay, someone asked me one more time. Okay, so which one do you need? So do you need DQL? Okay, I will show you. So DQL, see here. So if you want to query your data, okay. So there are two ways to do it. One is select star. Okay. So how to zoom it? So here. So select star from your table name. Okay. What are the table name number you mentioned here? Okay. If you run this, it will give you all the data from your table. Okay. Suppose if you want to get specific column alone, okay, so you need not need these columns. Okay, I need only ID and title. Okay, you can mention that particular title. It only that particular data will be coming here. Okay, so this is all about DQL. Clear? So in short, okay. So now select is done. Okay, so the last next thing is alias. Okay, so alias is here. So alias is nothing but, so you are mentioning, so if you see here, if you mention select ID title from post, see the column header ID and title, the same title is coming here, right? That we mentioned here. Suppose if you want to, from the output, it should be a different column name. Okay, so from the output, I need it in a different name. For example, I need not have ID. I need it as a post ID. Suppose if I do this, okay, so post ID is not present in your post. Okay, basically it is present as ID, right? You can mention some alias name. Okay, so as, see, this is what your alias name is, as. So you need to fetch your ID, but the column name should be in this name. Okay, something like post ID. Okay, so if you mention this, and this, see, it will now with the column name will be post ID. Okay, so post ID and title same applies to your here. If you want to mention it in a different name, for example, header or whatever that you mentioned. Okay, so basically alias. Okay, as, so if you mention as that particular name, okay, it will come in that way. Okay, so alias here. Same example here. Okay, so with your alias name here. Okay, so it will come in that particular column name. Okay, so whatever that you mentioned. Okay, so these are all some basics that we have done. Okay, so alias is done. Okay, so we still have 30 minutes. Okay, we will cover them. So we have something called class. Okay, so before that, can I proceed with this? This looks like overload. So based on based on the answers from you guys, I will proceed. Or is it like a go overload? Is it okay? Okay, so most of them mention it's overload. Okay, so what I'll do is, so I'm getting more votes for overload. Okay, so what I'll do is, I'll do a recap of these things. Okay, so we'll close today. Okay, so we'll have our class in the tomorrow. Okay, so in the tomorrow session. Okay, so we'll come here. So I'll go over these topics again. Okay, so I'll just go over quickly. Okay, so see here now. As I mentioned, what is a database? So database is nothing but it is going to store some data and it has some data inside it. It can be of any form. Okay. So basically it holds your information. Okay, information inside it. Okay. So how your web application works, there will be a client and that particular React, consider React is a client application, right? It communicates with your server and gets some data and displays in your table or whatever the data that you mentioned. That's what we saw in the React session. Okay. So we are getting a data from your server, right? Okay. How the server will get the data? Okay. How that particular data will be stored? Okay. So those data will be stored in the database in some form. Okay. So in our case, we'll use something called MongoDB. Okay. So some same way, that is what your web application works. Okay. Client and server communicates between them, and server gets the data from the database and gets the data and send it to the client. Okay. So that is what your data normal web application works. Okay. And your server and your database is communicating here, right? Okay. And that's where your DBMS comes. So DBMS is nothing but database management system. Okay. Your server and database is communicating, right? So which is using database management system. Okay. So there are so as the user or your application, the server side application communicates with your database, okay, using your database management system. Okay. So there are two types of database management system. One is relational and one is non-relational. Okay. So what is relational? So relational is nothing but okay. So whatever the data you have, something like user, post, and comments, okay. There is a relationship act between each and every data, right? For example, your post will have user details like user ID. Okay. Same way your comment will have the post ID from your post table. Okay. So something, this is what your relational database is. Okay. So relational database is nothing but a relationship between the data. Okay. So if there is a relationship between the data, we will use something called relational database management system. Okay. And here it needs a language to communicate between the database. Okay. So it needs your application or your user, whatever the thing. If you want to communicate with your database, you need a language to communicate. Okay. And that's something called SQL. Okay. So your SQL and SQL is used to communicate to your database in your relational database management system. Okay. So SQL is nothing but a language. Okay. So we call it as SQL. Okay, in the English-speaking countries, they will say it as a structured English query language. Okay, so SQL. Okay, so some examples of relational databases: MySQL, SQL Server, Oracle. These are all some databases. Okay, and same way for non-relational. Okay, it doesn't have any relationship with the data. It doesn't have any language to communicate. Okay, it is basically a NoSQL database. Okay, so NoSQL database. Okay, an example of them is MongoDB, Cassandra, and other things. Okay, so this is all about your basics of your DBMS and database. Okay, and then here the installation comes. Okay, so I could get some questions. So which option to be chosen for downloading MySQL, archive, and test to save in Windows 686 So for your Windows, as I told you, okay, I will come from scratch. MySQL. I'm going to MySQL website, mysql.com. Downloads. Okay. So in the case here, go to the community edition. Okay. If you are using Windows, go here. Okay, and use this particular version. Okay, which is like 450 MB. Okay. So your community edition. Okay. So this is something called web community. So we don't prefer them. Use this installation. Okay. So which is MySQL installer community edition, which is something like with your 450 MB. Okay. So that is what with your MySQL. Okay. In the case of another OS or other OSs like Mac or Ubuntu, you need to install two things. One is community server and workbench separately. Okay. So that is the process of your installation. Okay. So click on the community server and select your OS here. So select your OS here and download based on your system. Okay. So basically go with the top one. Okay, so go here. Okay, same way for Windows, just go here. Simple. Windows is very simple. Okay, you just need to download this particular thing because MySQL is also Windows is a Windows product. Okay, and if you Windows is also like your Microsoft product. Okay, so you can go ahead and use this one. Okay, so which is 450 MB. Okay, download this. So if you do this and the step by step, okay, you just need to give next. Okay, no, there will be no questions. Okay, just proceed with next. Okay, and if it asks for any libraries to be installed, install that particular library as well. Okay, so once it is done, at the end it will ask you for a password, for a root password, and you can mention some password to it. Okay, it should be if it is a MySQL. So you're installing MySQL 8, right? So okay, it will ask you a password, and it should be like at least 6 characters, I think. Okay. Yes. Yeah, it should be 6 characters at least. The password should be, else it will show you an error. Okay. So in order to create a password, then you just need to enter the password and confirm password. Okay. And once you're done, that's it. Okay. So that's it with your MySQL installation. Okay. So here, so it asks login with Oracle account. So when you click on download, what happens? Here, so if you go here, there is no thanks, just start download here, right? You can skip them. You need not need this. You can go ahead here. Okay, so that's all about your installation process. Okay, so clear on the installation process? It's very simple, no big things. So now, this is something like your interview question. Okay, so default port for your 3306. So this is where your MySQL is running. Okay, 3306. Okay, so now when you install it, okay, you can go ahead with your MySQL workbench. Okay, so here, just go over here. Click if you want to first at the first time there will not be any connection. Just give here. Give some name to the connection. You can mention anything. It's nothing but you are connecting to your MySQL, okay, using this connection. You can have multiple connections. You can have any name to this connection name. Okay. Next time, you need not enter your configurations. Okay, so that's why we have connection here. So you can mention local and URL is localhost. Okay, so if you go here, I'm editing this. So I am having it in this name. Okay, and other things are localhost. Default port is 3306, and the default user is root. Okay, the password that you entered at the end, right? So that particular password you need to enter here. Okay, so once you're done here, okay, and just close it. And if you want to test the connection, you can test them as well. Okay, so once you do that, just enter this. Okay, you will be entering into the application. And at the initial stage, there will not be any schemas here. Okay, because you haven't created any schemas, right? So basically, there will be sys here. Okay, so this is system database. So maybe this particular database will be there. Okay, but other database was created by me. Okay, so that's the thing. So then what we saw the data types. Okay, so different data types. What are all the different data types? Integer, integer, float. So integer is to store your numbers, and integer, if you mention some length, okay, it will store up to that particular length. If you mention 2, you can store up to like 99. So starting with 1, 2, 3, and until 99. Okay. Same way, if you mention int of 3 or integer of 3, it will allow you to store until 3 length of data. Okay. So still 999, you can store them. Same applies for your float. Float is going to be store your decimal place numbers, like your floating points. Okay, so 0.23 and these are the things. Okay, and again you can mention some numbers here. If you mention float of 3, so the data here, right? Okay, so the data here you can mention up to 3 characters. Okay, same if you mention comma 2, the next characters will be taken. Okay, so you can mention 3 characters of left side and 2 characters of second and the right side. Okay, and double, the same applies to your double as well. And varchar, okay, so you can mention varchar here. Okay, so basically it takes some parameters. Okay, so we don't need this. Okay, anyways. Okay, so varchar of 5. Okay, you can store only 5 length. Okay, whatever the length you mention, okay, it will store until 5. Okay, so if you mention any other characters like length of 10 characters, it will trim it and have only the 5 characters. Okay, and same for boolean, you can store 1, 0 or true, false. Okay, and enum is to store a set of values. Okay, only male, female, and other. Okay, only these type of database will be allowed inside that particular column. Okay, and same applies for date, and same applies for your date time. So date is going to store your date. Okay, date time is to store your date at both the time. Okay, So that is the thing with your basics. Okay. So then what we saw DDL, DML, and DQL. Okay. So what is a DDL? So DDL is nothing but data definition language, and DML is data manipulation language and query language, data query language. Okay. So what these are doing here? So DDL is to it is going to define. You are going to define your data. So for example, suppose what is the column name that you want to mention? What is the table name? What is the database name? If you want to modify the database name, you can use it there. Those definitions, right? So they are going to just manipulate, or they are going to just handle your definitions. Okay. So there are different scenarios. One is creating a database. Okay, if you want to create a database, create database and the database name. Okay, same if you want to delete a database, drop database and the database name. Same if you want to rename a database. Okay, so you need to use alter database. So you need to know these queries. Okay, as a developer, you need to know these queries. So alter database, your old database name, because you are going to rename a database, right? So alter database, your database name, and modify your name to your new database name. Okay, so that is what alter database is. Okay, renaming the database. Same way, if you want to create a table, okay, so inside your database, there can be multiple tables, right? So if you want to create a table, create table and your table name. Okay, so here, this is an example. Create table post, okay, and it takes multiple parameters. You can have any number of parameters. Okay, it's like a function here. Okay, you can mention any type of parameters. Okay, thing here is first thing is your what is the column name that you want to mention, and what is the data type for that particular column. Okay, so if you mention ID, it should be integer. If it is user ID, it should be integer. Title, body, everything is varchar, and title can be 45 characters and body can be 100 characters. Okay, so you are just defining your definitions. You are just defining your data. So defining your data for your post table. Okay. Same if you want to delete the table. Okay. So delete is nothing but dropping the table. Okay. So dropping the table, like drop table and table name. Okay. It will completely drop your table from your database. Okay. What is an alter table? So alter table is to, so you already have a table. If you want to add a new column or modify an existing column or delete a column, you can use alter table. Okay. Alter table, your table name. If you want to add a new column, add column active. Okay, and this is a column. I added a new column called active and giving some new data type. Okay, same way if you want to modify existing column. Okay, so alter table, that particular table name, modify whatever the column name that you mentioned, like active is the one you mentioned here, right? So active and varchar of 5 here. Okay, so whatever, so I'm modifying from boolean to varchar of 5. Okay, so now we have something called delete column. Okay, so if you want to delete a particular column, same way, alter table, the table name, drop your column. Okay, so drop column, and what is the column name that you want to drop. Okay, so this is all about your handling with your definitions. Okay, so now here data manipulation language. So manipulation is nothing but you have a data and you are going to manipulate them. Okay, so inserting, updating, deleting. Okay, so far your definitions are done. Okay, your configurations are set up. Okay, now we are going to insert the data, update data, delete your data. Okay, so how to do that? If you want to insert a data into your table, okay, insert into, and whatever the table name that you mentioned, like post. Okay, and the column name. So whatever the column, you can modify here. You can have column 3 here. You can have column 1 here. You can just you can have any order, but the same order should be maintained in your values as well. Okay. So column 1, value 1. Column 2, value 2. If you want to have column 3 here, okay. So column 3, value 3. Something like this. So insert into post ID, user ID, title, body. Okay. So this is the ID, this is the user ID and title and body, some sample data. Okay. Same way, if you want to update the data, okay, so update table name, okay, set. Okay, you should always know set. Okay, so whenever there is update statement comes, you need to use set. Set. Okay, suppose if you want to modify the user ID, okay, user ID equal to 3. Okay, so you are going to update your columns. Okay, every columns to user ID equal to 3. Okay, so then now delete the data, delete the data alone. Okay, not the definition. Okay, please see it here. Deleting the data from table, dropping the table is different. Okay, so dropping the table means you are completely deleting the table from your database. Okay, no definitions, nothing. Okay, But deleting a data means your definitions are still there, okay, and you're deleting the data inside your table alone, okay. So delete from post will delete the data inside the table, okay, not the table, okay. So that is what deleting the data, okay. And then DQL, okay. So DQL is nothing but you are going to query the data or the reading your data, okay. So select star from the table name, okay. So select star from post will give you all the data from your table, okay. Same way, if you want to have specific column mentioned, okay, you can mention that column here. So for example, column 1, column 4 from that particular table name. Select ID from title will get the data as ID and title alone from the post table, okay. So then the last thing is alias. Okay, so I told you, right? If you want to have a different name for your ID, okay, whenever the output is coming, okay, so select ID as post ID. Okay, so whatever the data that was in ID, it will come as post ID in your output. Okay, so that is what alias is. Okay, clear? Clear on the database part, so that we have here. So I have some questions here. So if there are 2 or more database with same column name, how it will be used? Okay, that was a good question. Okay, so see here. So that was a good question. See here now. I have a post table here. Okay, so something like this. So, for example, select star from posts. Okay, so I have something called select star from post. Okay, so if I do this, okay, it will give my data. Okay, but this particular post here, right? It is a table here. Okay, table inside your Gui post. It can the post table also there can be another post also in another database as well, right? Suppose if I go to create one another table, okay. So see here, so Gui post 2. Okay, so I'm going to create one more database now. Okay, so I have one more database. Okay, and inside that particular database, okay, and again I'm going to create a table. Okay, so what I'll do is so I'm going to create the data here as well. Okay, and I'm going to insert some sample data. So another table, okay, so another database and another table. Okay, so that's the thing. So now I have 2 database, okay, with same number of with the same table name. Okay, so posts. Okay, so here post. Okay, and this is the post from your Gui post. Okay, see, if you add Gui post to that particular column, okay, so Gui post dot post, okay, it will get the data from that particular database. If you use Gui post to dot post, so that particular database name dot the table name. If you mention, it will get the data from that particular column. Okay, so that is how we'll begin. See here, this is coming for Gui post. This is coming from your Gui post too. Okay, but you can. Okay, for example, I lost the charge. Just give me a minute. Okay, so now I have 2 tables inside the same database. Okay, but here if you double click on a particular database, suppose if I double click on this database, okay, you don't need to mention this. Okay, so you can directly call post. Okay, it will give the same data. So what it means is you are selecting that particular database. Okay, but if you go here, okay, if you want to get the data for the Gui post or another database, you need to use Gui post dot data. Okay, something like this. Okay, or if you do it, if you want to have one common thing here, okay, so see, this is a query tab. Okay, you can mention a database that you want to use. For example, use, okay, and that particular database name. For example, I'm going to use Gui post. Okay, so using this database, I'm going to select star from posts. Okay, so if I run this, it will get the data from my Gui post database. Okay, see, it is coming from my Gui post. Same way, if you want to get the data from Gui post 2, okay, same way here. Okay, and run this Gui posts. See, this is the data from this particular database. Okay,
So use and that particular database name, and you can query them in between. Okay, you can query anything here. Okay, so this is the command to select a particular database. Okay, I will add them as well here. So I can add it somewhere here. Selecting database. Use database name. Okay, the example is use Gui posts. Okay, so if you want to query multiple data, query a database into a when if you want to query a particular table from specific database, you can either use Gui post something like this. Okay, you can use it in this way. Okay, or you can use it in this way. Okay, so Gui post and don't need this. Okay, so suppose if you want to query multiple things, okay, something like again select star from any other table, okay, it will be helpful for you. Okay, you need not mention Gui post dot two dot post, and same if you want to query other thing, you need not give Gui post two dot post. Okay, you can mention at the top like use this particular database, and you can query those database alone here. Okay, so that is the thing. So yeah, thanks for asking that question. Okay, so that was really a good question. Yeah. Okay, collectively, do you guys have any questions? Clear on this? So I will move this. And I need to give you feedback link. Sure, sure. I will share you those. Okay, so I will share your today's part. Okay, then you guys asked me the text file, right? Go here, your computer, MySQL. Yeah, I sent the text file as well. So it's uploading, and I have some questions here. So how do we link and use DB to our JS project? Yeah, that's what Node.js comes into place. Okay, so we'll see how to link our database inside our Node.js and have them query. So we still have some sessions. First, you need to know what is a database and how to query the database, and then we can understand how to link our Node.js and the database to query our part. Okay, so what we are here is, so I'll share my screen again. So now in our web architecture here, we completed client and React. Okay, so now we are in the place of database. Okay, so database and MongoDB. Okay, so once you know these two things, okay, in between there is a server, the intermediator. Okay, once you know client and database, okay, then only the intermediator can be learned. Okay, so that's why we covered client first, then the database next. Okay, and the last thing is how to connect client and database and act as an intermediator. Okay, we'll see. So we'll see them in the node session. Okay, and what else the question? Repeat the last discussed topic once. Sure. Okay, the last discussed topic is this one. Okay. So what is the topic here is, so you have two database, Gui post and Gui post 2, two database. Inside that we have we have a same table name. Okay, post and post. Okay, suppose if I go here, okay, so if I use select star from posts. Okay, so which database will it query? That is what a question here, right? So if you double click on a particular database, okay, it will select. See, it is displayed in bold. Okay, So it is displayed in bold. So by default, if you query your post, okay, only this particular database data will be coming here. Okay. Suppose if you want to have the post data from here, okay, so you can just double click it. Okay, so it will select that particular data. This is one way. Okay, see now the post is coming from this particular database. Okay, suppose if you want to specifically get data from this particular post here, okay, you can use Gui post2 dot post. Okay, so basically database name dot that particular table name. If you do this, that post data that is coming from your Gui post to. Okay, so this is one way. Okay, if you don't want to do this, at the top you can add use and your database name. Okay, so you don't need to mention it here. Okay, so now we can query whatever the data that is inside it Gui post to database. Okay, so now see. So now it's getting the data here, Gui post. If I use Gui post, okay, this particular database will be selected and that particular data will be coming. Okay, so that is the purpose of use. So selecting a database to query. Okay, so selecting a database here. Okay, yeah, yeah, that's it, guys, and see you tomorrow. And here is your feedback form. Please fill in it. And if you have any questions, please do ask me. And try out the queries. Okay. So please try out the MySQL queries. Don't leave it as it is. Okay. So we'll see what is class and other topics tomorrow. Okay. So yeah. Thank you and see you tomorrow. Bye bye.